So I'd like to call our next panel up here, and while they're coming to the podium, a little bit more about Kevin Siegel. He's the head of business development and partnerships at Kodiak Robotics. He joined Kodiak in 2021 and has played a key role in growing the company's commercial partnerships with private firms and national carriers. I introduced Richard Bishop and the other panel members earlier, so please come up, Richard, and take charge of the panel.
All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. That last session was amazing because there was just so much information, and I was able to get a feel for what kind of questions are on your mind. Really nice job on your part, Gary. So I'm going to give you kind of a big picture on autonomous driving for the trucking side in particular. What we're looking at, the biggest of the big picture is driverless is happening everywhere these days. And just to go quickly through here, robots in the warehouse, a huge amount of things happening for farmers. We've got, of course, the robo-taxis is what you hear about the most in the news, and then robots moving freight, as well as industrial operations, all sorts of industrial operations. The deal is that wherever there are wheeled vehicles doing work, there's a use case for autonomy. Autonomy can play into that, and that's why we're seeing it all over the place. Now, for trucks specifically, and Gary got into this a little bit, it's driven by these factors. There's a continuing driver shortage. We've heard that before if you follow this industry at all. It's actually happening in most parts of the world. It's an issue, it's got to be handled. Autonomy can certainly help. The energy efficiency is better because an autonomous vehicle can run as well as your very best driver with 20 years of experience, but you have it all the time on an autonomous truck. And that it could be maybe 7-8% better fuel economy, that type of thing. That adds up. Shorter transport duration times because we don't have to worry about driver's hours of service, and Gary spoke to that. Talk about asset utilization. You've got your trucks out there, so depending on your operation, those trucks are sitting doing nothing because your driver's resting. What if that dynamic goes away? What does that do for your business in moving freight? Increased safety, I think, is obvious, and overall some lower cost of operations, and I'll get into that in a moment. There's 4 domains in the truck world. Long haul, we just talked about. There's short haul B2B, quick runs in a local area, for instance, refreshing inventory in stores, that kind of thing. It's a different sort of operation. Industrial operations, as I mentioned a moment ago, and then logistics yards, trucks that never leave the facility. They're moving trailers around all the time. Another great case for autonomy. And I'm not going to get into all of these for the sake of time, but I'll jump into this. Here's the big picture in terms of who's doing this work. You see under long haul, a lot of companies. We just heard from Aurora. Bart Auto is represented here. Kodiak is represented here. Possibly some others. A lot going on there. In short haul, a couple of companies, Einride and Kodiak. I'll speak to some of that. And then in the logistics yard, quite a few companies. And all of this tech is quite mature at this point. Here's another vital piece of the puzzle. You can make the tech, but how are you going to get that tech to the market in large quantities? You do that by partnering up with a truck manufacturer. We've got the big guys in the U.S. We've got Freightliner. We've got PACCAR, we've got Volvo, we've got International. That's what's happening now across the world, as you see here. Aurora's partnered with Volvo and PACCAR, other examples there. So this is not the only way to market, but the fact that this has been happening over the last probably 5 years now, that is another point in terms of the maturing of the space. Now, I'm going to talk about Aurora a little bit. Gary and I just figured out today we're going to overlap. the reason I'm going to talk about Aurora and give them special attention is because they're the only guys that are publicly traded, so they do quarterly reports to investors. They put out a lot more information than the other guys. This doesn't mean that they're necessarily better than anybody else. They just talk more. So as we, in the Q&A, Aurora in their developmental process, 3.3 million commercial miles. All this information is on their website if you go to the investor relations. 0 Aurora attributed collisions. And the big news for the whole sector is that Aurora did launch fully driverless autonomy in Q2 this year. It is a historic inflection point in terms of what's going on. At the time that they announced at the end of June, 20,000 miles. Now they're up to 50,000 miles driving. I think the reason there's these are slides from Aurora, obviously. I think the reason there's three trucks up there is that is the number of trucks they're running now, and they'll clearly add to that along the way. Gary covered this, but I think it's important to talk about the progress in terms of the atmospheric conditions, the night day, the snow. We talked about that a lot. That long list of companies that I showed you, all of who are developing this technology, they are competitive, fiercely competitive. The guys who can more quickly handle heavy rain, snow, dust, all of that, they're going to have a competitive advantage. And so that's a real race that's going on out there. And we'll see. I'm not concerned about getting this technology all the way up here. It's going to happen because of those competitive factors. Now here, sorry, this is probably unreadable from where you're sitting. At the bottom right there, I just highlighted some of the economics. This is how Aurora looks at it. You could probably debate it. But the whole point down here is that in a 1,000-mile trip from Fort Worth to Phoenix, a regular driver can run that. In a week, they can run about 3 runs because of driver hours of service. Aurora can just keep running, so they can do 8. This is their example. And you can look at the numbers there, and it turns out at the bottom that regular everyday driver has a 3% margin in terms of take home. Aurora has 10%. That's the business case. Reducing that, increasing profit, reducing the cost of operations. Now, there are some things happening not too far away from here. Truck automation corridor on I-70 is being funded by the U.S. Department of Transportation as well as state of Ohio and state of Indiana. So they wanted to see what does this mean for road operators, and they have developed a truck platooning test that's going on with a company called Kratos and Ease Logistics. Kratos will be represented here tomorrow, as well as level 2 operations with the driver engaged, and level 4 is coming up soon. So that's just a quick FYI. So moving from long haul to the short haul, here's really the primary player in this space called Kodiak. The short haul logistics market, it's not as obvious. It's kind of crazy obvious. The trucks are all over the place, but people tend to get hooked onto the long haul. $250 billion short haul logistics market. Kodiak is running in Texas, Arkansas, and Ontario. They're operating because imagine Kroger. It's one of their companies, and what Kroger has a distribution center. They got stores all over the place. They have to refresh inventory. These are repetitive runs. It's the same roads all the time. For autonomy, that makes things easier, and that's what Kodiak is doing, and there's a high value of getting that done. They're running 65 trucks right now. They have announced that by the end of this year, they will be running driverless, fully driverless, instead of a safety driver approach. Logistics yard, just very quickly, this is quite mature. Hundreds of thousands of moves have been done. We'll see a lot more happening there. There's partnerships with the OEMs there as well. And then in the industrial operations, there's been a lot of work here. Probably the first commercial autonomous trucks were on surface mines in Australia about 20 years ago. But it's moved a long way since then. It's spreading to a wider and wider set of vehicle types and environments. Kodiak in particular is running tractor trailers in the Permian Basin. We'll hear more about that from Kevin. That's what their operation looks like. And so really we're in a very important time. This is an inflection year for autonomy. It's happening across several use cases, several different companies. It's pretty exciting. Now, a couple of things that'll feed into our panel discussion. What to keep an eye on? Regulatory certainty. We've got an interesting situation in the U.S. 25 U.S. states have passed legislation saying, okay, good to go, autonomous trucks can run here. They didn't necessarily have to do that because the way it works in the U.S. federal vehicle regulations, if it's not specifically prohibited, it's permitted. So if all the rules are silent about autonomy, which they were because nobody thought about it long ago, by default it's okay, you can do it. But this doesn't provide regulatory certainty, right? If you're a big company, you want to do better than that. So the industry has been pushing on US DOT to get some things done. Really didn't happen the last couple of presidential administrations. It seems to be there's some momentum now under the Trump administration. So let's see how that goes. Canada now has a driverless allowance process for trucks, just announced a couple of weeks ago. So check that out if you're operating up that way. And Europe has a process in place too, which has taken a long time, but we'll see things amping up in Europe. Now in terms of safety performance, and this came up in a couple of the questions, the early autonomy approach, what they call AV 1.0, was lots and lots of on-road testing, like that 3 million miles that Aurora did. All the way through, there's always been artificial intelligence. That's been around for a couple of decades. But it was primarily, let's get on the road, expose the vehicle to a lot of miles. The new paradigm is AV 2.0, which is very heavy on AI. So you create a virtual world, and that's where you do most of your development and certification because you can really do billions of miles in virtual space. Folks will argue about that a lot. No, that's not good enough. But I'm telling you, that's the way it's being done. And then, of course, eventually getting on road to validate what you think was appropriate in the artificial space. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. So safety validation becomes a question mark. We'll probably talk about that in just a moment. The science of safety validation has vastly increased in the last 10 or 15 years for autonomous vehicles on roads. That's good. There are skeptics. There's still that question of how do you know it's not going to do something wrong? And the developer can't say it will never do anything wrong. And that's sort of the tension in the space. Just a couple more things. Scaling up, for most of these automated driving system developers, the end customer is the OEM, the truck manufacturer, just like suppliers do in the vehicle industry. So the idea from these vehicle manufacturers, it'll be coming from the factory, fully ready to go up with autonomy around 2027, 2028. Not too far away. And the uptake will be strong, simply because of the economics. So the business models, most are operating as a supplier to an OEM, but there are others who are saying, we don't need to have a partnership, we don't need to deliver there, we can just buy these vehicles, especially when they, and then upfit those vehicles for the autonomy, and then just go run freight and be a direct competitor to the freight companies that are out there now. Bart Auto and Kodiak are working in that way. Then at the bottom, it's a whole discussion of its own, insurance and liability. How does that play into this space? So with that, I'd like to bring up our panelists, and we'll move over to the chairs here and have some discussion, and we'll take questions as well. So let's go with some quick introductions. And Kevin, if you'd start off, tell us about yourself and your company.
Yeah. Kevin Siegel, Head of Business Development for Kodiak. I've been with the company a little over 4 years, and prior to joining, I worked in transportation and logistics for about a decade as a freight broker.
Go ahead, Bart.
I'm Bart Teeter. I am the Director of Fleet and Operational Safety for Bot Auto. We are a L4 autonomous vehicle developer based out of Houston, Texas. Prior to that, I did 26 years with the Texas Highway Patrol, mostly, well, almost entirely in commercial vehicle enforcement, and the last 4 or 5 years of my career, working on the integration of autonomous vehicles into the Texas transportation ecosystem in a safe, reliable manner.
Gary McCarthy, same as 30 minutes ago.
There we go. We have that question about the regulatory situation. I think, and depending on the type of operations you're doing, can I get you guys to comment on the current regulatory situation and where would you like it to go, either at the state level or the federal level?
I guess I'll jump in. I think, the term you hear most often when we talk about the regulatory, situation around the country is a patchwork, right? That we have there's not a lot of continuity or consistency necessarily from state to state. And so when we're looking at interstate trucking operations, that's problematic, right? We can't have going from Texas to New Mexico an entirely different regulatory scheme. It just doesn't set up for interstate commerce. That's why, as much as I think it pains a lot of us from certain places, particularly in Texas, to ask for federal intervention, we need that federal framework. And as you pointed out, current administration, NHTSA, FMCSA, I think they're moving in the right direction. So we would love to see some consistency, some interstate commerce rules. Obviously, we think we're onto something good in Texas. There's a reason why 7 out of 7 of the commercial or autonomous freight developers are conducting their operations and their testing in Texas. We would love to export that Texas model across the country.
Yeah, Gary?
The one thing, too, the Sunbelt states have done a great job embracing this technology, Arizona, New Mexico, across down to Florida. So I think the states are taking it upon themselves to make it welcome mats open, let's do business, and let's build this technology. But like Bart says, building that framework is going to make it solid across the country.
Mm-hmm. Kevin?
Yeah, the new Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, during his confirmation, spoke about the need for a comprehensive federal framework for autonomous vehicles while ensuring that framework does not stifle innovation. So we're hopeful at some point in the next 12 to 24 months, there will be a federal bill unlocking the additional states. So basically all that to say, we do not see any regulatory barriers to future deployments for autonomous trucks.
We heard a lot about Aurora already today, so let's flip over to you guys. Tell us, for you, Kevin, what's happening with Kodiak these days? What sort of use cases are you following? What's your future plans?
Yeah, so I'd say probably the biggest achievement over the past year has been delivering a revenue-generating driverless product to our partner, Atlas Energy Solutions. Atlas and Kodiak were the first 2 companies to publicly announce that we have integrated driverless trucks into commercial operations where the trucks are fully owned and operated by the end user, which in this case is Atlas, which essentially means that for the day-to-day operations, Atlas is self-sufficient in the management of these autonomous trucks. We started with, 2 trucks in December of last year. We recently delivered the 8th truck to them as part of their initial 100 truck order. And we see this as a huge competitive advantage because we can take the learnings garnered from working together and carry those forward to future deployments with additional customers across multiple use cases. The 8th truck that we delivered here recently, I think it was last month, was the first to come from Roush, who we've selected as our upfit partner. Roush, essentially, they take the base truck, they add full redundancy across the platform, so braking, steering, and power actuation, in addition to the hardware, software, sensors, and compute, basically turning a manually driven truck into an autonomous one. And then I guess, and I can't go into too much detail, but we're on our path to becoming a publicly traded company. There was another announcement, I think, released this morning about it. And as part of that process, we've raised a couple $100 million to support our growth as we begin to scale operations.
And just checking out one detail, what are the length of these runs that you're working in the Permian Basin, more or less?
So, I mean, they vary from 5 miles to 50 miles, and this is all off-road. The reason we were able to do that is, as you can imagine, off-road you encounter far fewer scenarios than you can on public roads with crosswalks, pedestrians, intersections, that type of stuff. So we were able to validate the safety case, mid-2024. At that point, we started looking for domestic applications, within the U.S. for our technology, and that's when we found Atlas, and it's been a very fruitful partnership for both companies.
Okay, great. Let's go over to you, Bart. Tell us more about Bot Auto. What is your use case? Where are you operating, and where do you want to be in the near future?
So yeah, Bot Auto, our use case, our business model, if you will, is a little different than most of our friends in that we want to offer not our technology as a service, but our transportation as a service. One of your final slides up there, Richard, mentioned, competing with, other freight carriers. And that's obviously a part of it, but also working with major established freight carriers. We recently announced an agreement through J.B. Hunt Dedicated with a local Texas business in San Antonio, hauling freight for them from San Antonio to the Houston and eventually other areas. So we see ourselves, obviously there's some competition there, but also in partnership with some of the major carriers to pick up that excess capacity that's coming. Right now, we're focused on that Houston to San Antonio round trip, hub-to-hub model, always looking for more freight partners. Once we have mastered that and can do it safely, and we're hauling freight on a regular basis, then we'll look at things like we'll look at Laredo. We'll look, where do we go to the east? So we're really looking at that, and the foundation. Before I say what I'm about, the foundation of everything we do is safety, right? That's why guys like Gary and I are in this business, because I think we truly believe that this technology is going to save lives. But we can build the best technology in the world that's the neatest thing in the world, and if businesses won't use it, then it's just a neat parlor trick. So right behind safety, as we're building this technology and making our highway safety, we're laser focused on cost per mile at Bot Auto and how we can lower that cost per mile and drive revenue and be good partners, be good business partners, as well as good safety partners for those folks that we're hauling freight for.
Okay, and let me stay with you for a second, Bart. I want to hit everybody with this. It's the safety validation question. As I kind of flippantly said when I was presenting, and to some people it sounds like, oh, just trust us. But of course, it's not that simple. And when you're working with J.B. Hunt, they were probably asking you questions, and at some point they were satisfied. And so can you get into that? I know you're limited, but how do you respond to folks like that? And I'll ask the question to everyone.
Sure, and we like to say about everything we do is validation. We're constantly validating our product. We're not, necessarily, we're not testing. We're, whatever. Even if we're doing operations where we're hauling freight, we're validating our system. But again, we don't expect you to take our word for it. If you go on our website, you can look and you can find the framework for our safety case, right? Which, will show you the methodology that we're using to prove that and validate that our technology is safe. Obviously, there are things, underlying there that we don't necessarily share public as far as data or or the secret sauce type stuff, but that is available to someone like J.B. Hunt. That is available to NHTSA. That is available to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. So yeah, we want trust, but we want to earn that trust, and we're going to provide the data that shows that we validated our safety case.
That's great that you mentioned that, yes, this information exists and it can be shared privately with customers, with regulators, which is, absolutely essential. Gary, what would you add to that?
I think, too, the ongoing testing we're doing at the tracks to make sure, but the cherry on top for us is the LinkedIn, what we were talking about earlier, the profile on LinkedIn, where you can get on and look at our truck moving from Dallas to Houston and Houston to Dallas, and you can watch the entire run and live stream and see exactly what it's doing. We talk about it all the time. What can we do to put more people in trucks? If we could put everybody in trucks, they would understand exactly how safe it is. That's the closest thing we can do to getting to people, seeing it firsthand. And I think everything Bart said was 100% accurate. And it doesn't matter which company, we're still doing the same thing, to be transparent, make it marketable, to bring it to market, but also be transparent with the motoring public.
Okay. And Kevin, from a Kodiak perspective, as I understand it, I think you're still running on highways for developmental processes as well as the Permian Basin. So how do you respond to questions that come your way?
I'd kind of echo what both Bart and Gary said. We utilize what we believe to be industry best practices to formulate our safety case framework, and have built kind of a clear evidence-backed case for why our technology is fundamentally safe to deploy. It all comes down to data and numbers, basically math, and until we're able to prove that confidently to ourselves and our partners. So to date, I want to say we've got 3 million, give or take, highway miles, 0 at-fault accidents, a perfect safety score. So you can promise people till you're blue in the face, but I think it's a matter of demonstrating kind of that safety's the foundation of everything that we do.
And I'll ask one more question, then we can open it up for questions from the audience. What about it already came up earlier, the weather robustness? Freight needs to move everywhere, and if you're not operating in Texas and you're looking down at Texas, you're saying, when does this come my way? And let me just get responses from each of you. And Bart, if you would start up. How is this going to evolve? And with what, how's it going to evolve?
It's a great question. I like to joke. We go around and, I do with John Sova, who will be with again tomorrow. We talk about a lot of this stuff. And, we go all over the country and we talk about the first question we always get from first responders is, who's going to put out the emergency triangles, right? That's always, unless you're from Colorado. And then it's who's going to put on the chains to go through the passes on Interstate 70. And so to answer your question right now, nobody, because we're not going to do that, right? Because we are going to validate our systems in the Sun Belt before we attempt to, Gary and I were recently in a call with Volpe at USDOT, and somebody dropped in, that we were scared to go validate our technology in Minnesota. We're not scared. We're just not stupid, and we're not reckless. And we've made this compact with the public and with the regulatory agencies that we are not going to do that until we're sure we're ready. And the best way to make sure we're ready to do that is validate this in the Sun Belt. Get this technology to where it's near flawless, and then we can start adding elements of weather and stuff. So how long is that going to take, Richard? That's a great question. It could be years. This I-70 corridor is very interesting to me that USDOT and Ohio Transportation are working on. That's because that's going to encompass some of that. So my guess is years. Whether that's 2 years or 6 years, I don't know, but it's not tomorrow.
Yeah. Kevin, but what about your perspective? And of course, there'll be other folks, off-road folks, who are further north, So what's the Kodiak?
So as I mentioned, I've been with the company a little over 4 years, and multiple states have been unlocked from a regulatory perspective since I've been with the company. But all the initial companies that had AV legislation passed were in the Sun Belt. Couple that with the favorable weather, and that's why you have all the companies operating down there for the most part. As we all work to get a product to market, it doesn't make sense to kind of make the problem more difficult, from an engineering perspective than it already is. And there's enough freight in the Sun Belt to keep everybody busy for a long time. So that's why everyone started there. Now, we had one of our Ford F-150s in Michigan last year for the military. They had gotten a considerable amount of snowfall the night prior to our arrival, and that was kind of our first exposure to wintry conditions. So we said, hey, let's see what happens. Let's deploy the truck. I think it was disengagement free and handled the conditions very well. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily a huge engineering lift to optimize for those conditions. If there was a compelling use case, in the back end or any other region that we thought, was an attractive application for our technology, we could optimize for it. It's just not something that we've dedicated a ton of engineering resources to, at this point.
Gary, what would you add? You spoke to this a little bit earlier.
Yeah, I think I echo what they say, but also it goes back to the testing part of it. We have to be in those environments, we have to be in those climates, and we have to be in those I-70. We have to be on hills and passes and snow. And our partnerships with Montana and Arizona, that's how you're going to build that and build a product at the same time. So there's two prongs. You have your operational side, going to market side, and then you have your testing side. And you have to keep those running in parallel because we're only going to advance if they advance.
Yeah. And, an obvious point to make, maybe it's a little theoretical, is these are for-profit companies. They want to make a buck. And if you can do that in the lower third of the U.S. and just nothing but that, well, there's a lot of freight there. It's not a have to, but also, as I said earlier when I was giving the presentation, your competitors are going to be getting up north, and if you're not doing that, well, that's a business decision. But I think that's the competition will really make a difference there. So we are blind up here, but we are ready to take a question. Oh, now I can see. So do we have someone? Or Denver, do you have a thought?
Okay, questions in the audience? If not, then I'll just kind of follow up on what the discussion was.
Hello. All right. So I like the bit on the fact that there's harmonization on the regulations to ensure that the autonomous trucks are able to move across states, which is very important. And then the other bit on the fact that the data sharing, you are very transparent on it. My question is, what are some of the key performance metrics that the companies are measuring now? Apart from maybe vehicle miles traveled, what are some of the metrics that the companies are measuring at the moment?
I think we didn't get the core question because of the microphone and such.
Okay.
Can you repeat? Just the last part.
Yes. The companies that are testing the autonomous trucking are like the Aurora and the others. What are the key performance metrics? Yes.
Okay.
That they are measuring.
Thank you. What are the key performance metrics that are driving you guys forward?
I'll take a stab at it. I think, in addition, you mentioned mileage. Obviously, we love to report big miles, right? And we're in a space where safety is measured in 100 million mile increments. So as we get closer to that, as we cross 100 million miles as an industry and get multiple, obviously we're proud of that. But it's not just miles, it's quality miles, right? It's what we've experienced within those miles. And we talk about edge cases and corner cases. We want to experience, in controlled environments, those first responder interactions, those emergency interactions where there's a vehicle broken down on the emergency lane or in traffic. We need to experience a variety of construction scenarios, a variety of weather scenarios. So yeah, mileage is important, but the quality is probably as important, if not more important, than the quantity of miles. So that's really the metrics we're looking about. Have we experienced everything that we need to experience to look the public and look the regulators in the eye and say, we're ready to take the driver out of a bot auto or somebody else's truck?
Okay. Anybody else on that?
I think for us too, we talk about, like you mentioned, we're a profit company. So it's time the vehicles are down. How often are we late? Are we on time? You saw my performance. We're nearly 100% on time. I think that's where you're looking at how many miles driven is a great key element, but how many customers we working with, what's the on-time delivery, what kind of vehicles are we getting from them? Because you guys are going to be shocked when I say this, but trailers can be a little rough when we get delivered. So we got to make sure the tires are in good shape and the brakes, but just working with our customers to get that level of compliance with the trailers for the inspection.
Yeah, and I recall Aurora was putting out data earlier on about how many times did a truck on a long run have to be rescued, and you had to send out people to do that, and that number went down and down and down because that's a killer to profit, and those as well as remote support. Even though you don't have to send anybody out there, if you're doing that frequently, that's a huge cost. Got somebody else?
Other questions here?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the remote support. Could you talk a little bit more about that with the remote control centers? Say, going from Dallas to Houston, how often are they intervening for the trucks on the road? Or say in the Permian Basin with Kodiak, are you still actively involved with the remote control centers?
Yeah, so what's the experience so far with remote support?
Well, for us, for Aurora, going from Houston to Dallas, the remote support, and I always tease people, there's no one in their basement wearing bunny slippers and a robe running the truck. That doesn't happen. So it's a fully command center. They're monitoring the vehicle. They're seeing everything that goes on with the vehicle throughout the shift. But also, if there's an issue that comes up where they can give it suggestions and say they can breadcrumb it around a situation if something pops up, but the truck ultimately has the ultimate decision whether it can or cannot do that. And if it can't do that, it'll pull the shoulder and stop. So the trucks itself with the remote assist is more of they can suggest, but they'll never take over the truck and run it fully operational.
Yeah, very key that we always make that distinction that these are not remote operators. These are remote assistants. A remote operator would, in Texas, I'm sure, and I believe just about anywhere that the regulations would require a remote operator to have a CDL and a medical card and obey hours of service and be in a DOT drug testing pool and all of those things. So it's remote assistance. A bot, we're a young company. We just turned 2 years old a couple weeks ago. So we are constantly monitoring them as they're going. But when we get to the point where we make a humanless operation, where we remove a driver, our remote assistance will have very limited capabilities. Trigger a minimal risk condition where it'll pull to the shoulder and stop. Do an emergency stop in a lane if the situation warrants it. Allow the vehicle to restart from that emergency start. That is telling the vehicle, okay, take control. When it's safe to do so, the vehicle makes the decision. Same thing in the emergency stop. The vehicle makes the decision, where can I stop? How quickly can I stop? So those are the things that we can do. There's no operation of the vehicle from, as Gary said, someone's basement, with a gaming console.
And in your world, Kevin, I don't even know if you have cellular coverage where you're operating, but how does it work for y'all?
Yeah, so we, as our driver as a service model, as part of the subscription fee, it comes with 24/7 op center support provided by Kodiak employees. So this isn't the type of thing where we kind of throw the technology over a fence and we say, here you go, good luck. It's a very in-depth partnership, and we monitor the trucks both over the road and industrial off-road, like we're doing with Atlas, 24/7. In the event that there's an issue with the truck, say a blown tire for over the road, we have enough technology to see what occurred. We obviously know that a tire was blown. We can dispatch roadside service. Through systems integrations, we can update our partners with ETAs of roadside, alert shippers or consignees of delays in transit, etc. So we will always provide this 24/7 op center support as part of our subscription fee. And
that was a great question. I want to pivot to one other question to you guys, and we can still It's up to you, Denver, how long we keep going. But cybersecurity, man, I hear it come up over and over, and folks will say, there's no way this can be cyber secure. But you guys have worked it, no question about it. Kevin, you want to take that one, and how does that play into your space?
So I'm definitely not the subject matter expert on cybersecurity. I do know that we've hired Google's former chief information security officer, so he's implementing kind of best in practice, across our platform. Do I know specifically what that entails? No, but I know that it's something that we take very seriously.
Bart?
Same. I think as you look across the landscape of autonomous vehicle developers, this is something that is taken very seriously. We all hire high level, either they got Google. We hire people from government. We hire people from NASA. People that are a lot of experience in securing high risk situations. And so again, Kevin's coworker, Brett Fabry always says, hashtag not an engineer. I am not an engineer and not a cybersecurity specialist, but we do take it very seriously.
Yeah, the only thing to add from our perspective is if there is an anomaly caught and the truck gets a performance it wants it to do, it shuts down and pulls the side of the road. So any hack that comes into the truck will go to minimal risk. So like I told you guys, you got the motor cop, not the tech guy. But we all hire outside people to do the best they can to hack into it, and we learn from every day.
Okay. And I think this is true. I've heard it from many of the companies that you don't depend on a communication stream that you don't control. For instance, GPS, you can't fully depend on that. You can't fully depend on any other data coming from some third party because that's a cybersecurity risk. You may take in that kind of information, but it's not critical to the safety operation of the vehicle. And there's a lot more to be said on that one. But who else do we have? What other questions do we have?
So this kind of goes on the last two questions. So how many the assistants are watching a vehicle. Are they watching one vehicle or are they watching multiple vehicles? And then I guess the other question would be if they're providing these instructions to the vehicle, what kind of scenarios are they most often giving insight to the vehicle? Is it because it's a lane closure that they weren't expecting? Is it a crash or something? I guess I'm just curious that if that data is available, and I'm assuming you use that data to then change the software.
Okay, so that spoke to the what kind of scenarios are happening out there when it comes to remote support, as well as is it always one-to-one, or can you spread that across several or single operator, several trucks? What's actually happening when remote support is going on? And I think maybe your last point was are you actively changing software or whatever in the moment? So I'll leave it to you guys. Go ahead, Gary.
So we're 1-for-1 right now. Because like I said earlier, in the whole industry, there's 100 trucks. So we're 1-to-1, and how that rolls out and how that scales in the future depends on the efficiency, and maybe it's 1-to-5. Who knows how that looks in the development. But what we're seeing mostly is collision scenes when they have to go into the shoulder or closer to the median to go around it. We'll have breadcrumbs that we'll have to give it advice to do that. Or if we have to do a shouldering scenario and the shoulder's too narrow, we want to get it down the road just a little bit further to get a wider area for the truck to park in, we'll do it there as well. But those really are the ones we're seeing mostly is just the collision scenes and having to go onto shoulders to pass, and the truck doesn't think it has enough room.
Yeah, I agree. At Bart, if we're on the public roads at this point, there's a human safety driver behind the wheel. So we're not super experienced. We're working that out. As Gary said, right now, if we were to perform a humanless operation, I believe it would be 1-to-1. Going to be curious to see, as we talked earlier about standards being developed, federal frameworks and regulatory standards. That probably is something that will be addressed at some point. Is what's the good number? Is it 1-to-3, 1-to-5? Can you go as far as 1-to-6 or 7? We just those are things we're learning. And I will say, just like everything else we've said, we will validate that, and we will start at 1-to-1, and we'll make sure we're good at that. And then I would say we would go to 1-to-2 with somebody in the background, just in case that person can't handle 2. And if that works, maybe we go to 3. It'll be an iterative process, just like everything else we do, where we crawl, we walk, and then we run.
Kevin?
Agreed with what both Gary and Bart said. In a future state when there are hundreds or thousands of autonomous trucks on freeways, we see a one to multiple, one operator to multiple vehicles. Now what we're doing in the Permian, I would say easily the most common thing that we come across are blown tires. The road conditions aren't great, so that's very common. As far as issues with the autonomy system, I don't think we've had any where remote support has been needed, but if there were, they're kind of there as a last line of defense, so to speak.
Okay. Anyone else?
Okay, I'll pose a question then. On your chart, Gary, you talked about addressing rain and wind. We have some pretty strong winds in the Great Plains. So even in Texas, I would think you get out into West Texas, it could be quite windy. So in terms of the autonomous driving system with, say, a 53-foot trailer, empty trailer behind it, what kind of information is generated, and how is the ADS trained to know if there are any maneuvering adjustments required, or if it's just, okay, we're just not going any further?
Well, what we found, because even a normal day in West Texas would be 30-mile-an-hour winds. I mean, we have winds all the time. Even in Arizona on I-10, there's winds that blow constantly. The truck adapts, countersteers into that. We've seen that several times on I-10. But what we really focus on, if we know, it goes back to if it's predictable, it's preventable. If we know a storm's coming, it's going to have 60, 70-mile-an-hour winds. Right. Why launch until it's gone? So I think for us, we don't have to force ourselves into a bad situation. We can forecast it and be smart about it. If it gets to that point, then we have a rescue team where there's things we can do in advance of that. But really, our whole goal is to not launch in a place where it's going to end up in those situations where we're stuck. And I think that's the great thing about this, is we don't have to run in bad situations. But if we get caught there, the truck, from what I've seen, countersteers and balances that out very, very well. But it gets to a point where the winds are so high, you're a kite no matter what you do. So that's the best way to describe that.
Right.
If we can train a human driver to do it, we can train an autonomous driving system to do it. And if we do that, then we feel like we can handle conditions that human drivers could and should handle. And again, if we're getting 70 or 80 mile an hour straight line winds in Van Horn, Texas, then nobody should be out there, let alone an autonomous truck.
Well, I guess I'll tie the question back to dust storms in West Texas. Obviously, that's a common occurrence. And we've got the same as their trucks, cameras, LiDAR, and radar. There is a term, it's called sensor fusion, which basically merges the inputs from the different sensors. Now, in the event of a dust storm, we're able to bias certain sensors over others. And that, I guess, that allows us to kind of still build a reliable picture of where the truck is, where we're operating, so the trucks can still function.
I think at least one more question for me, and you may have others, Denver. We hear about robotaxis in the news quite a bit, and they keep popping up in new cities. Waymo's now running in Atlanta. Zoox is running in Las Vegas. So there's been this process of expanding geography. What does that look like to your companies? What has to happen in order to say, okay, we're ready to move further into Arizona or move further north? What kind of process do AV truck companies have to go through to expand your geography, your area of operations. Go ahead, Kevin.
So as Alex mentioned earlier, there is a mapping process required for these trucks to operate. It's not the type of thing where I could just take a truck and plop it down out, in the outskirts of Boston today and expect it to work. We have to map the routes first. Now, something that's unique to Kodiak is our mapping approach is referred to as sparse maps. The reason that we adopted that approach is our founding team of engineers all came from other self-driving companies where they used HD maps, high definition maps. As you can imagine, those require a tremendous amount of data to create in the first place, and then they frequently have to be updated. Let's say you're going from fall to winter, the foliage changes, you have to remap. Our mapping approach, we're basically able to capture the lane lines, and that's enough for the trucks to operate. Now, as far as geographic expansion, our competitors a few years ago all seemed to be setting up shop in the Southwest over in Phoenix. So we kind of went with the opposite approach and stood up a truck port in Villa Rica, Georgia, which is just west of Atlanta. So where our competitors all kind of operate to the west, Texas in the west, we go to the east. Now, what's limiting geographic expansion from there northward, I think is just more or less getting a product to market over the road. Like our competitors, we still have a safety driver in the cab because we're still in the process of validating the safety case. We plan to pull the driver out of the cab the second half of next year. At that point, it'll be fully autonomous. And then we're not going to map a route and say, hey, if you have freight here, we can work with you. If not, tough luck. It's more of a partnership approach where if our partners have enough demand on a certain route or a corridor, then we will go out and map that for them because they obviously want to operate trucks there. So it's not our way or the highway type of thing. It's definitely a teamwork approach.
Okay, great answer. Bart, what would you add to that?
Again, I think you master what you're doing. In our case right now, that's that I-10 route, Houston to San Antonio, before you worry about new routes. Those of us that have been around for a little bit, we saw, you mentioned the robotaxis. We saw a robotaxi company that seemed to prioritize scaling over validation, over safety. And it didn't work out well for them. They're not with us anymore. So, there's already some cautionary tales out there about what happens to AV companies that don't do the right thing. So, we master where we're at. Then we look at, again, business partnerships. Where does it make the most sense? And then we repeat that process. Hopefully that process gets faster. As time goes on, our system learns quicker, but we have to do that mapping. We have to do that validation before we can even think about opening a new run.
They kind of summed it all up, but I think really it comes down to the customer. That's really where the key element for us is where our customer needs the lanes run and how that works with them. We just can't, like you said, drop in and just map. You got to have a map to run it. But if we know how our customers are going to expand and grow and what lanes they need help with, I think that's exactly where we're going to make get some metrics on turning revenue.
Okay, and neither of you were very specific, which is fine. But from what I've heard across the industry, it's it depends on the length of a new route or whatever. But it's a matter of months. It's not a matter of years. Denver, over to you.
Other questions in the audience? Yes.
I'm curious if any of you have a time frame involved in when this, because if I'm doing the math right, we've got basically between all three of you less than 500,000 miles of autonomous driving total. And probably 10, 12 trucks or something like that. But obviously, it can be done. It looks like it has some research yet to be done. But do you guys have a time frame where you think in 15 years or 10 years or whatever? Because I have no idea.
That's to get up to the high mileage?
To where there's a practical business model.
Where's the business model? Okay.
To be used by any transportation company.
So kind of ubiquitous for freight haulers.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
You know, ubiquitous is one thing, but you know, I think Kevin just spoke to their goals about removing drivers on their runs mid to late year next year. You know, Bart Auto, we've talked about removing a driver in limited freight runs as early as sometime before the end of this year. Now, there's a difference between doing a run or several autonomous freight runs and scaling and being ubiquitous and being profitable. I think in your question you mentioned a 10 to 15 year period. Lord, I don't think anybody up here thinks that's the time frame. I think we're in a 2 to 5 year period before we think this is a big part of the freight ecosystem. And it becomes so hard, and we've seen it. We've seen different developers and operators talk about, we want to do something by this date. We want to do something by, and including my company. We've given some general timeframes. But what it comes down to is, if this was easy, a lot more people would be doing it. And it's an incredibly difficult thing to do with a degree of certainty that's high enough that we're not endangering the public. And so all I will tell you is, although we have these very aspirational goals of having some driver out runs this year, and within the next year or two be doing mixed fleet operations in Texas, we're not going to do it until we can do it safely. And that's that's the promise. And so if we've got to delay it, we will delay it. We've seen that with our competitors in the space as well. So we're going to do it as quickly as we can do it safely.
And as I referred to in my presentation, another huge inflection point will be when autonomous equipped trucks are rolling off the assembly line from the truck manufacturers. And that will open the floodgates, certainly. Whether, Bart Auto has said, you'll be buying those trucks and you'll run from there. Aurora will, I think it'll be more like not only Aurora but others, that the OEM is the face of the autonomy to the freight operator, just like they have been forever. It makes a lot of sense. You've got a long relationship with your chosen one or two OEMs. You want it to flow through those kind of channels, and I think that's what we're going to see. And that's not very far off, 2 to 3 years.
Okay, thanks. I think we're going to call it quits now. It's about 5 to 3, so why don't we take our break, and we're going to start our next panel about 3:15. And so I'd like to give this panel a great round of applause. And so thank you all very much. And